This story begins at night. Why at night? Because it was a night job. Obviously, only those who were busy during the day worked at night, the students. However, Hobang lied to the driver, claiming he was 20. It was still a very young age for such hard work. The driver couldn't lift the box. What? Were they putting stones in there? Hobang realized he should help. He easily lifted all the boxes at once, while the adult man couldn't even handle one. The driver's jaw nearly dropped. Yet Hobang insisted that he was perfectly fine. Meanwhile, the work was already finished, quite quickly, thanks to the teenager. He could breathe a sigh of relief that they believed him, and returned back to the store. Meanwhile, dawn was breaking. The boss was outraged that they asked Hobang about his age. But the teenager swore he lied and they believed him. He understood that he would have big problems if he got caught. The boss knew this. He hired the boy due to his circumstances but still worried. Suddenly, he noticed that Hobang had previously worn a different school uniform. He completely forgot to mention that he was already in high school now. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to public transport. Behind Hobang stood two girls discussing the boy's uniform. They were seeing it for the first time. Hobang heard everything. The girls were curious why he was taking the subway. Didn't every one of those students have a personal driver? Or had the school started accepting kids from regular families? Regular families? What did regular even mean? Someone like them would never understand. Tuition at Seoul High School cost 10 million won per semester. Because of this, it was often called the Chaebol High School, the largest corporations in Korea owned by one family, and most students were children of those families. So how could a boy like Ho Bang get into such a school? On the way to school, a group of boys from another institution was smoking. They wanted to skip classes to go to a computer club, but no one had money for that. Suddenly, their leader saw something interesting. That ridiculous school uniform. He recognized a student from Seoul High School. Another added that it was a school for rich kids. The leader didn't care anymore. He focused all his attention on the rich. It was already clear where this was going. The group of cool boys was in shock. They no longer believed that Ho Bang was from Seoul. Where was his money? Why was he bringing his own food? But it turned out he was just a scholarship student. Ho Bang said he was late for class, so he asked for his backpack back. The leader didn't get the money he wanted, but he had to get something else. It seemed to him that Ho Bang was too polite. The poor student found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time. They returned his backpack, albeit a bit roughly, but that wasn't all. Because the bullies still hadn't had their fun. Ho Bang immediately got punched in the stomach, after which he was hit again. The leader was annoyed that Ho Bang seemed to think he was special just because he was from Seoul. But in reality, it was clear that the bully was just angry at the whole world. Ho Bang understood what was going on too. He probably should have pretended to be scared. Seoul High School selected scholarship students from poor families every year. Ho Bang's stomach growled. He pulled out his crumpled snack from his wrinkled backpack. This year, Ho Bang was one of those lucky ones who received a scholarship. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Seoul School itself. He arrived there, his clothes were in terrible condition. But Ho Bang himself wasn't beaten or scratched, just a bit dirty. The school itself, he didn't think there was anything special about it. Not in the school, but in the students. One student got out of a car, the driver opened the door for him, bowed, and called him young master. Young master? Another student was addressed as Miss. Miss? Ho Bang had never seen such cars. Was this some kind of auto show? Everyone looked at him strangely. He felt those gazes on him. It was a bit awkward. Now he began to doubt whether he could attend such a school. But there was no turning back. Maybe he should have washed his clothes first. Ho Bang immediately made it clear who among them was the scholarship student. The sideways glances spoke for themselves. But this topic quickly shifted to another. They were discussing some girl who was going to attend this school. The parents of their wealthy children had already instructed them to befriend this person. Everyone was discussing it, but no one mentioned names. Ho Bang, of course, was not in the loop. Was she some kind of celebrity? And at that moment she walked in. All eyes were now on her, not on Ho Bang's dirty clothes. It was the younger sister of the president of Hyesen Group, Kang Gai. Among all the students who got in, she was from a real chaebol that ranked among the top 3 Korean conglomerates. Ho Bang didn't understand what any of this meant. He wanted to find a restroom. His lunch was calling him back. Everyone was making such a fuss over her. Was she a princess? In any case, her appearance screamed wealth. To be honest, Ho Bang was incredibly envious. She didn't have to worry about money like he did. Kang Gai noticed his gaze on her and responded in kind. Suddenly, Gai's expression changed sharply. Hobang was already scared. He had had enough of confusing situations for one day. She was approaching him, and Hobang ran away, thinking she was curious about how someone like him was here. It seemed Guy was ready to speak. Everyone was shocked. Was this loser acquainted with someone like her? Hobang wished he could sink into the ground. He didn't want so much attention on himself. Gay did end up speaking to him, but she was interrupted. They announced the start of the entrance ceremony. Everyone had to take their seats. So everyone had to line up as they were arranged. A strange bald woman came on stage. She was the school principal, Ashlyn. A quiet laugh spread through the hall. Hobang was very indifferent to all of this. But he wasn't indifferent to the fact that Gay was staring at him again. How much longer? This was starting to annoy him. She didn't notice anyone but Hobang. The rest were completely gray to her. But don't switch off. I promise this story isn't about love. It's much more interesting. Meanwhile, the entrance ceremony was coming to an end. The principal bowed, and her bald head caught the spotlight. Everyone was blinded. Was she doing it on purpose? For some, it was just the perfect moment. Hobang vanished, as if he had been waiting for the right moment to escape. Everyone left the school. There were no classes that day. Gay was searching for Hobang with her eyes. But everything was gray. She saw no one. What a pity. But they would meet again, right? Just then, someone called her. She didn't think it was Hobang. The voice was familiar. A beautiful, tall, and stylish girl came to pick her up. It was her older sister. She was asking how school was, but Gay said the students were just gloomy. It wasn't very interesting to listen to, but there was something. Gay asked her to find out about one person. Honestly, this isn't a dumb love story. However, her sister also decided she liked someone. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to residential buildings, regular neighborhoods. Hobang wanted to sign up for a part-time job, handing out flyers. He was calling from a landline. He got accepted, so Hobang was happy. Gay was watching him from a car. Here's where it gets interesting. Two girls were strolling down the street together. Suddenly, someone in a pink costume abruptly shoved a flyer at her. Guess who was in the bear costume? Just a cutie. Exhausted, Hobang finally took off that stuffy costume. This was his second part-time job. He earned $20,001 for it, about $15. However, Hobang was satisfied with this. His singing testified to that. He was so happy that he didn't even notice he was being watched. Meanwhile, the scene shifted back to school. A week had passed since Hobang started studying there, and no one had spoken to him. Was he a recluse, or were they just ignoring him? Overall, he was fine with this. Hobang was tired from night shifts and handing out flyers. He hoped he could continue studying peacefully at this school, so he would have the chance to sleep between classes during lunch to work at night. But his plans were just ruined. Two classmates came over. In a week, they hadn't even remembered his name, Hobang or Obang. They wanted to find out about the scholarship that was being paid to him. They learned that the conditions for the scholarship were basic means for survival. Their tiny brains managed to analyze that this meant the state was paying Hobang, and he went to school for free and received everything for free. Was he really a beggar? They decided that his scholarship was funded by the payments of others. Hobang realized this was a transition from ignorance to bullying. But he decided not to stay silent and asked what they meant. A classmate handed him $50,001 and said to buy some bread. After all, Hobang studied for free, but he had to pay for food. The classmate said he wasn't that bad and laughed, allowing him to keep the change. The events shifted to the store. Hobang held the bread in his hands. Now this place resembled a school for the wealthy, but he was even glad for such an errand. Isn't it wonderful? He even had 47,001 left. Suddenly he was called. It was her, Gay. They hadn't seen each other all week. But how did she know his name then? And what about the bread in his hands? Meanwhile, the two boys were discussing their actions with Hobang. For some reason, they found it amusing to send a classmate for bread. He compared Hobang to a dog wagging its tail when they said he could keep the change. Gay overheard all of this, and then she abruptly entered the classroom. Everyone, as always, stared at her. The two boys could hardly wait to think of something else very funny. But their plans fell through if only they could see their faces. Gay took the bread from Hobang and asked whom it should be given to. Everyone was silent but looked at the culprits, which gave them away. Gay approached them, and out of fear, they even began to stutter. She ignored all their questions and asked if the blonde girl had ordered it. Our little girl began to sweat down her face. Gay wanted to find out if they had called Hobang a beggar. The boys regretted this a million times. Gay asked if they would give her money too, if they had so much. The blonde was so scared that she started apologizing. She looked down. Just as Gay thought, the coward was frightened, after which she silently left. But Hobang was not satisfied with all this. The atmosphere became completely different. He decided it would be strange if he kept the money for himself. So even though he didn't want to at all, with trembling hands, he returned the change. The boys accepted it. Meanwhile, the events shifted to that street. Hobang stood in a pink bear costume, counting that by handing out flyers for 2 hours, he earned 20,001. It was impossible not to cry over this, especially when he was also being beaten. 7,001, his money. Suddenly, someone yelled at the hooligans. It was Gay. She defended the bear because there was a living person inside. Hobang couldn't believe such a coincidence. Probably just a coincidence. But when Gay called him by name, earlier she had learned everything about Hobang, the city, the house, the rent, even that his parents had died when he was a child and he lived with his grandmother. Recently, she had fainted while collecting paper for recycling and had been in the hospital. Gay roughly calculated that one night's work was not enough to cover all expenses. And that's probably why Hobang wore that silly costume. But what was she doing? Hobang was furious. How did she find out all this? Gay ignored this question and asked if he needed money. Hobang shouted, "How could she behave like this?" Gay ignored that too, offering to eat tteokbokki with her for 100,001. Why are you looking like that? Would you resist such an amount? Hobang didn't understand what was wrong with Gay. But the rich have their quirks. Gay noticed that look on her. She said everything was written on Hobang's face. He thought she was strange. But she liked his honesty. Gay offered to take something else if he didn't like it. Hobang pretended it wasn't about that, but he was already afraid that Gay knew everything about him. Suddenly, a terrible thought crossed his mind. It couldn't be. She fell in love with a handsome guy like Hobang. Gay addressed him by his full name. She was definitely confessing her love. She asked if she could ask Hobang for a favor. What kind of favor? Gay promised to pay, again. Could he resist? He needed the money very badly, not just for himself, but for his grandmother. Meanwhile, it was already getting dark. Gay still hadn't told him about the favor, and it was time for Hobang to go. She kept the intrigue, but said just a little longer. And at that moment, it happened. A man came to the grandmother's place where they were eating. She said she would prepare everything for the next week. But the man didn't like that. He started yelling and throwing chairs. It turned out that the grandmother owed money at a high interest rate, but couldn't pay it back. And the man didn't care. He was one of those who came to debtors and crippled them. Hobang began to guess what kind of favor Gay was talking about, and he understood everything correctly. She would pay, and Hobang had to get rid of that man. It seemed there was no sense in this, but I assure you, you will understand everything ahead. Hobang was furious. And how was Gay different from those classmates? Pretending to be nice all day just to ask for something like that? She was just a hypocrite who solved everything with money. Gay ignored everything and raised the stakes to 1,000,001. Well, what are you judging again? That's $750. Hobang arrived just in time. The grandmother was in danger. A brief conversation passed between the man and the student, revealing that this grandmother was not related to Hobang, and therefore the collector didn't understand what was required of him. To be honest, he didn't know the answer to that question either, as he didn't have time to think before his body reacted on its own. 1,000,001. The man was not one to solve problems without brute force, so Hobang immediately received a slap. Little brat! Didn't he see that adults were working here? But the man was very mistaken if he thought it would be that easy to get rid of Hobang. He couldn't believe his eyes. There wasn't even a scratch on the boy. He asked the man to leave the grandmother alone. The man could no longer hold back, so he continued to solve problems the way he knew how, with his fists. This time, Hobang took a beating. Several times. Hobang didn't even dodge. Yeah, Gay was even disappointed for a moment. Well, finally, this time, Hobang had to understand for sure. He lay there powerless. The grandmother was worried about him. She wanted to go to Hobang, but the man grabbed her by the neck like a cat, and then threw her away like trash. The man was now even angrier at her because he thought she had brought Hobang. Suddenly, Hobang got up again. He didn't have a single scratch on him. He said the man was an adult and should behave accordingly. That was the last straw. It seemed Hobang really wanted to go to the other world. He hit the student in the stomach with all his might if he wanted the man to behave like an adult. Then he had to get up. Now Hobang would give him a few personal lessons. 1,000,000. The man didn't hear. Hobang shouted louder about 1,000,001. The student knew exactly which strings to pull. Even Gay became curious. Hobang broke into a self-satisfied smile. 1,000,001, money solved everything. However, for some reason this had the opposite effect. The man lunged at him with his fists again. Hobang just stood there waiting for another punch from this gentleman. Gay expected that the classmate would show this scoundrel. But no, this idiot got hit again. She regretted a million times that she got involved with such a fool. Hobang couldn't even stand up for himself properly. The man blamed the student for provoking him. Truly a very adult position. But the worst part was that he blamed the grandmother for bringing this idiot. Hobang got up again. He asked the man to finally stop. However, he couldn't understand why the man, having beaten this teenager well, why did he get up every time? Hobang told the scoundrel that he had already poured out all his anger, so he could leave the grandmother alone. But all his pleas were in vain. Such stupidity was starting to irritate Hobang, but it seemed the man had found a new breath. He began to feel insecure that he couldn't beat an ordinary teenager, so he kept hitting Hobang without stopping. Well, this time there had to be a result. He had to knock Hobang out. After all, he was just a child. But the student got up again. It seemed he didn't care at all. The man couldn't just leave it like that. He had fought with so many people, thugs and tough guys, but he couldn't handle a child. Even Gay didn't understand anything. She couldn't comprehend why Hobang allowed himself to be beaten like this. The man decided that the student was some kind of lunatic because he wasn't getting hurt at all, yet he let himself be hit like this. Suddenly, an old lady clung to the man's leg, pleading for him to stop, as this was just a child. But this only irritated him more. He had no conscience at all, so he was about to hit the old lady too. But something went wrong. He didn't even understand what had happened. Before he could blink, he was already thrown back several meters. Everyone was shocked, even Gay. The man landed painfully on his back. He simply couldn't believe it. A child had beaten him? Hobang approached to ask if the uncle was okay. But it seemed the man was already afraid of him, because he suddenly got up, cold sweat dripping down his face. Hobang wanted to assure him that he hadn't been hurt badly, but the former tough guy was backing away. The student couldn't understand why. The man ordered the old lady to prepare money for the next time. His voice no longer sounded so confident, he was even stuttering. And he threatened Hobang with death if they ever crossed paths again. Of course, they would never meet again, because the man was afraid of the encounter himself. Hobang could finally breathe easy. He had completed the task. And Gay herself told him this, suddenly appearing as if out of nowhere. Hobang immediately reminded her about the 1,000,001. Gay just confirmed once more that he really loved money. But that wasn't right. Wasn't he even curious about where he had gone? Gay called him to come with her, and on the way, she would explain everything. But Hobang had no more time. He needed money, and that was it. Gay knew this about his job in the store from 11 to 6. She told him to quit. It was illegal work. Hobang replied that it was legal with the guardian's permission. But Gay knew for sure that the old lady hadn't given permission for such work. That didn't even need to be checked. So she threatened to tell if he didn't go with her. Who had he gotten involved with? Gay changed her mind and decided to tell him this, whether he went with her or not, since the store manager hadn't even paid Hobang the minimum wage. Little ginger monster. Meanwhile, it had already gotten dark. They were sitting in a cafe where Gay confessed that she had done this a long time ago, so Hobang didn't need to come to work anymore. He was just furious he needed a job. But even if Hobang had stayed at work, he still wouldn't have earned as much money as he needed. Didn't he understand that? Gay said not to worry, as she would give him money. But what was the catch? Why would Gay do this? At the entrance ceremony, she had acted strangely, and now her orders were the same. They had just met. Did she learn something else about him, and Hobang wanted to know everything? Gay timidly said he didn't need to hide this from her. But what did she mean? Gay said that Hobang was different from others and knew it himself. But the boy didn't understand anything at all. Gay said that Hobang was like her and had a superpower. What the hell? They sat in silence for a while. Then Hobang decided to speak. He asked if Gay had hit her head as a child. By the way, about her childhood. Her mother had told her back then that when the time came, Gay would take her mother's eyes. The girl hadn't understood this at the time, but her mother said it had been the same for her once. She had gotten her eyes from her father, and now her mother was giving them to her daughter. It was natural. This was what parents passed on to their children, and the mother promised to try to pass it on as late as possible. After all, the world she saw with those eyes wasn't so beautiful. Gay suddenly asked, what exactly had her mother seen? She wanted to know the difference between what her mother saw and what she did. The specifics. Finally, something interesting was starting. Gay said that her eyes saw special people, like Ho Bang. Special people had abilities beyond human limits. For example, the ability to throw a person high into the air. And her ability was to see the color of those like Ho Bang. In her eyes, everything except that was gray. And she noticed that Ho Bang wasn't just strong, he had been beaten, but there wasn't a scratch on him. She was exaggerating. The teenager considered himself just a bit stronger than others. And Gay didn't understand why Ho Bang let himself be beaten, as he had been in control from the very beginning. The answer was very simple and naive. Ho Bang was worried that the person could get hurt, so he decided to put himself in harm's way. It was better than someone else getting hurt. Everything would be fine with Ho Bang anyway. Gay said she had been looking for someone like him for a long time, and finding someone with enough self-control was much harder than just finding someone strong. She asked about Ho Bang's parents. The teenager didn't understand anything. Who was this story about Gay's mom for then? She had to explain again. She asked from whom Ho Bang had inherited this ability. You won't believe it. He still didn't get it. Gay was in shock for two reasons. First, could Ho Bang really be that stupid? Second, could he have inherited this ability without even knowing it? After all, he should have inherited his ability from his parents. Suddenly, many memories came before Ho Bang's eyes, but they weren't the kind he wanted to share. So Ho Bang simply stood up and left. His mood was completely ruined. He said he had had enough of this madness. Gay didn't like this. They hadn't finished yet. But Ho Bang had nothing more to say. He asked for the money tomorrow. She was rich. Gay was in shock. Was that just a condemnation directed at her? Ho Bang was in a hurry because he lost his job because of someone and advised Gay to read fewer comics. What? It was as if he was running away from her. As he went down, Ho Bang brushed past Gay's sister. She realized that the conversation had gone poorly, so she turned back to her sister. Gay was upset because they hadn't even gotten to the heart of the matter. The sister didn't believe that Ho Bang hadn't guessed about his superpower, knowing he could launch a person into the air. Something was off here, something was wrong with him. But still, the question remained, what was wrong with Gay? Did people always believe her right away? Whether Ho Bang acknowledged his strength or not, he still remained superhuman. The sister reminded her that Gay's ability wasn't just about what she saw. Had she forgotten what information they had found about Ho Bang? Meanwhile, the boy stood by his workplace. He lowered his head in guilt and asked to come back. But the boss didn't want to hear any apologies, as he would simply be fined. Ho Bang's entry into the store was forever closed from now on. But that still wasn't all. The teenager asked to return everything he had earned this month. The boss was simply furious at such audacity. But he still returned those coins to Ho Bang, as he knew how much he needed the money. I shouldn't say this, but in reality, the teenager always knew that his body was different from others. But if what Gay said was true, then he most likely inherited it from his mother. She wasn't present, but still made him recall those memories once more. It reminded Ho Bang of that painful night. The apartment building caught fire. Some managed to escape. But one man tried to walk straight into the flames even though they were stopping him. He shouted the names of the boy and his beloved. It was Ho Bang's father. Meanwhile, more apartments were catching fire. The firefighters were about to leave as they risked burning themselves. Suddenly, one partner heard a voice. He definitely hadn't imagined it. And so the firefighter ran straight into the flames. In doing so, he saved a little child. But that wasn't the end of the story, because the firefighter heard another woman's voice. Someone was still inside. That child turned out to be Ho Bang, and he was pulled out completely intact, not even harmed. And it was from that day that everything began. Ho Bang's father was beside him. He calmly waited for his son to wake up. But why then was he not with his wife? Ho Bang, of course, wanted to know what had happened and why he was lying there. However, Dad didn't know how to respond. He said he would do it later. But the son understood everything himself. He asked where Mom was. For a second, everything fell silent. The whole world hushed. And then a tear rolled down the father's cheek. Ho Bang's heart raced wildly. He suddenly felt very scared. The father asked the little child what he should do now, tears flowing like a river. Now the son felt even more frightened. The events shifted to a service room. You know, it was such a place where only the patient monitor could be heard. The only proof that the patient was still alive. Because right now, it was just a wrapped mummy, impossible to recognize as a person. That was Ho Bang's mother. Her whole body was covered in burns. The sight was too horrifying for the little boy, as he didn't even recognize his mother there. Hobang's body began to retreat on its own. He pressed against his father. Dad said that the mother had been searching for her son all this time. This meant that Hobang couldn't leave. In his mind, he understood that it was his mother in front of him, but his eyes saw something else. The poor boy couldn't handle it, so he screamed very loudly. After which, he ran out of the room, still shouting. Hobang was just a child and completely didn't understand what he was doing. He only knew that this woman was not his mother. Hobang didn't want to hurt his parents, but he did. Then he should have bited his mother by the hand, and the adult Hobang understood that. Wait, a superhuman? Hobang didn't even notice how he crumpled the coins in his hand. He didn't even put in any special effort. He wasn't a superhuman. He was just trash. The scene shifted to the hospital. Hobang arrived, and there was undisguised surprise on his face. The administrator told him that all the bills had already been paid. It was all very strange, but Hobang had a hunch about what was going on. He decided to visit his grandmother, as always. And there, his suspicions were confirmed. After all, he wasn't the only one visiting his grandmother this time. Gay was with him. Should I even mention that Hobang was furious? What right did she have to barge into his family like that? And to have the audacity to pretend that nothing had happened? They stepped outside to talk. Hobang had many questions for Gay. Her behavior was already frightening. She knew too much about him. Hobang confessed that he was a superhuman, but that had nothing to do with Gay. Suddenly, she began to tell him that Grandma was very proud of her grandson, that he got into a prestigious school on a scholarship and had never upset her in his childhood. Gay even felt a bit jealous. Grandma talked about Hobang all the time, but he was jealous of his classmate in every other way. Suddenly, Gay said that her parents were killed. How could he not have heard about the assassination of President Hisan? It was a big deal where 19 people were killed, but it remained unsolved. No one was caught. On the day Gay's parents were killed, the little girl was there and saw everything with her own eyes. What could be worse? And that man, suddenly the mother stopped twitching. Silence fell in the room. And then her eyes returned to their normal color. But Gay's eyes, that man was the first one little Gay saw with those eyes. A superhuman. That day, Gay's world changed completely, and she clearly understood that superhumans and her abilities were involved. So this situation could happen again. That's why she needed someone like Hobang, someone with equal powers. Of course, he didn't really want to get involved in something that involved the deaths of other people. But Gay knew how to persuade him. She told him about a specialized hospital with care for the elderly that was in their company. Hobang didn't have to worry about money. Gay promised to take care of everything. And he no longer needed a side job because she promised that Hobang wouldn't need anything else. Gay said she wasn't pressuring him, but in her opinion, that was enough to agree. For a moment, everyone fell silent. Gay awaited Hobang's response, but instead, he simply turned around and left. She was in shock. Why was he silent? Suddenly, Hobang agreed, but on the condition that Gay would take care of his grandmother, as she promised. To be honest, she was shocked that it worked. Her sister had told her that Hobang needed only one thing: money. She advised Gay to just tell the guy that she would give him a lot of money. But did her sister really think that would be enough? Gay had never needed money, so she didn't even realize how powerful a lever that was. Now she could breathe a sigh of relief. She had succeeded. Meanwhile, a new day arrived. The scene shifted to a sports center. There, Gay's sister was waiting for a meeting. She was with a bewildered Hobang. Gay had told him to come to the sports club, but hadn't explained why. Her sister wanted to check something, since they would have to work together. But why did she point to the exercise machine? The confusion was written all over Hobang's face. Her sister wanted to test how strong he really was. All Hobang had to do was lift that thing. However, first he wanted to know where Gay was. It turned out she had business to attend to. Suddenly, her sister understood something and decided to voice her brilliant thought that Hobang missed his friend. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to a new building, specifically to an apartment in that building. Gay was there with a realtor. With a realtor. It seems she wanted to buy that apartment. The realtor was very happy and suggested signing a contract. But she misunderstood Gay. She didn't want to buy that apartment. She wanted the whole building. I think your faces are as shocked as the realtor's face right now. Meanwhile, her sister was smoking and watching Hobang's abilities. Suddenly, her cigarette fell from her mouth because that idiot easily lifted the heaviest barbell with one hand. Honestly, she couldn't even believe what she was seeing. Hobang put down the barbell and decided to ask if her sister even had a name. She extended her hand to him. and introduced herself. Her name was Zhang Shidao. She said she was a bit different from Hobang, but was also a superhuman. Meanwhile, it had already gotten dark, but they were still at the sports club. Hobang was reading something. He named page 85, the fifth line, and Shidao quoted it word for word. Hobang couldn't believe it. He was holding the book Shared Journey. He questioned her again and again, but Shidao always quoted the book correctly. It was truly impressive. That was her ability. She remembered everything she had seen at least once. Hobang thought it was really incredible and cool. At that moment, Gay walked in. The conversation immediately stopped with her arrival. Gay handed over a phone and a key. She noticed that Hobang didn't have a mobile device, so she bought him one. And without drawing attention, she mentioned the key to the house, asking him not to lose it. She justified it by saying that Hobang's house was far away, so she bought the house too. He listened to all of this with a serious expression. Suddenly, his expression changed sharply. What? Meanwhile, a week passed. A lot had changed drastically. As Gay promised, Grandma was moved to a better center. She worried about where Hobang got the money, but she still didn't know about the new house. And also, Hobang got a phone for the first time in his life. But that wasn't the most surprising thing. He had his own house. Outside, Gay was standing and quickly and angrily typing something. Shi Dao was the first to notice that Hobang had come out. Gay was furious and immediately shared her outrage that he was late by a whole minute. And one more novelty during this time, the more Hobang received, the more anxious he became. Nothing in the world came for free. Everything had a price. The scene shifted to school, almost a typical day for an almost typical student. And by the way, the quiet school life had also changed. Finally, the lesson ended. Everyone could go to lunch, but not Hobang. He was called by Guy, who was already gathering all the attention. And now Hobang was getting it too, even though he never asked for it. Gay came to get him to eat together right in front of everyone. Should I even mention how embarrassed Hobang was? And should I mention that everyone called them a couple at school? Gay got the nickname Princess, and Hobang was called Beggar. The scene shifted to the cafeteria. Hobang noticed that Gay was eating this time without rice. This phrase was just to start a conversation while everyone stared at them and made their guesses. In fact, Hobang wanted to clarify something. He had only been receiving all the time but had given nothing in return. However, Gay didn't understand what was wrong with that. But it seemed that something still needed to be explained to this fool. She had already told him that Hobang had to do something when the time came. And when the time came, the boy wouldn't have to worry because Gay would make him finish the job, even if he didn't like it. While the two were talking, someone passed by, gathering just as many looks as Gay. It was some guy with blue hair, and he was heading straight for Kang Guy. And let's just say she was not very happy about this meeting. An old acquaintance wanted to join them for lunch. The whole cafeteria suddenly filled with the noise of gossip. Hyun-soo from 8, an idol from a group. It turned out he studied at the same school but didn't attend classes due to a tight schedule. Gay said she didn't care. So this Hyun-soo sat down. Hobang had no idea who this guy was, but he didn't like all the attention. It seemed Gay spent a lot of time with Hyun-soo. And the idol had heard about Hobang, who was called Princess and Beggar, and he agreed with that. He was sure that Kang Gay would be better suited to someone like him. But before he could say a word, Gay loudly banged her chopsticks on the table and said that she smelled something bad. It turned out that it was all about Hyun-soo's perfume. It ruined Gay's appetite. So she stood up and ordered Hobang to follow her. They would eat somewhere else. What else could he do? The bewildered Hyun-soo watched them leave. No one had ever humiliated him like that, but he accepted the rules of this game. Hobang noticed that Gay's character was not sweet. She was some kind of celebrity and she treated him like that. However, she didn't understand what was wrong with saying that a person smelled. But the problem was that Gay didn't realize it was bad because if someone said that to her, she would be offended. To be honest, Gay didn't even understand why she should care at all. A heavy pause hung in the air. Then Gay turned and said that Hobang needed to do something. There was tension in her voice. Hyun-soo watched all of this unfold. He was far enough away, so he couldn't hear what they were saying, but he was incredibly jealous. And it irritated him. Meanwhile, it had already grown dark. The scene shifted to a karaoke bar. Somewhere in one of the booths, there was quite a romantic vibe. At that moment, the door swung open. The bouncers were already on alert, wondering who dared to enter so brazenly. Dressed all in black, with a covered face, the bouncers even had to stand up to figure out who this reckless daredevil was. However, the conversation with these brutes was short. They didn't expect this stranger to use the same methods of conversation. His partner was even taken aback. So he didn't react in time to realize he would be the next victim. The bouncer received a knee to the chin. The boss, whom these brutes were supposed to protect, was in shock. He simply asked why a fight had to break out so quickly. It was Hyun-soo, and he said the bouncers started it. It was just self-defense. By the way, they were starting to come to their senses. The boss ordered them to step outside for a moment. Hyun-soo cast a sidelong glance. He looked at the girls, but his friend said they wouldn't bother them, and added that in any case, those girls wouldn't even remember anything. The friend immediately noticed that Hyun-soo was in a bad mood, and quickly realized it was because of a girl. Unfortunately, the brother couldn't help Hyun-soo with anything. Although, there was one thing the brother could handle. Why didn't Gae irritate Ho-bang? The bouncers were waiting outside the door. Hyun-soo asked who they were. It turned out that Kyung-sok had been in an accident and couldn't be there for a while, so he sent his juniors. He had sent schoolboys. Judging by their uniforms, they were from Jejeon High School, a terrible place. Hyun-soo asked Kyung-sok to better prepare his students, after which a pause ensued, a tense silence. Then he turned to his brother. Hyun-soo asked if he could use the services of those girls. Meanwhile, someone was having tea between some man and Shadal. She wanted to sponsor this man's athlete on the condition that he would secretly train one person, and the entire gym had to be used only by his athlete and the mysterious person. In reality, Shadal wanted the gym to be exclusively for her person, but she relented. The man was outraged, as such a request was already audacity. His pride wouldn't even allow it, as training an ordinary person instead of an athlete. But Shadal knew what arguments to present to satisfy his pride. At first, the man resisted and pretended it was beneath him. Shadal simply waited. She knew what she was doing. The coach gulped, after which he shook Shadal's hand. Money solved everything. Meanwhile, that athlete was training in the gym. He was alone. Han Jae-on was called. The coach came with someone else. Jae-yoon entered the gym alone. They hadn't arranged a meeting. The topic quickly shifted to Ho-bang, whom the athlete hadn't expected to see. It was quite awkward. Meanwhile, the event shifted to the day before, where Ga said that Ho-bang needed to learn boxing. She said the guy didn't know how to fight. Yeah, Ho-bang felt hurt, but he had no way to argue. After all, he usually just endured when he was hit because he didn't feel pain, until his opponent got tired. Gae explained that the people Ho-bang would deal with weren't simple. They were superhumans like him. The coach explained to Jae-un that now he would be training with Ho-bang. It was hard to explain that he wasn't an athlete, but just an ordinary amateur who needed to be taught. For Jae-un, it was hard to realize that the amateur would be trained by the director himself. After all, he didn't look like someone who loved to engage in sports. The director wondered where to start and asked if Ho-bang had any experience with sports. But he had no such experience. After a brief conversation, the director realized that Ho-bang had never engaged in sports at all. Jae-un understood that the coach didn't know the newcomer well and suggested conducting a test on Ho-bang's level. The director got angry. The athlete shouldn't use his skills on such amateurs. However, he didn't take into account that there was no one else in the gym and Jae-un needed someone to train with. I shouldn't say this, but Jae-un also wanted to show the newbie who was in charge here. So they prepared for battle. Jae-un promised to go easy on Ho-bang, just to check his level. He added fuel to the fire by saying that many of his opponents couldn't handle it and ran away. The director then told Shidao that even he couldn't teach them anything because they just ran away. But she promised that she wouldn't withdraw her sponsorship and take the money, even if that happened. It was the fault of those who couldn't handle it, not the director. And to be honest, he hoped for that. It would be better if Jae-un gave the newbie a few lessons. But he was still worried and asked the athlete not to kill Ho-bang. Jae-un didn't want to scare the newbie and asked him to start first. But Ho-bang was simply in shock as he didn't know what to do. Jae-un was shocked once again that his opponent was so far removed from sports. Interesting. What a strange stance. Ho-bang asked if he could attack. There was a pause, after which Ho-bang's fist appeared before Jae-un's face. However, he was indeed a good athlete and dodged the blow. Ho-bang, to be honest, didn't expect that at all. He simply fell to the floor. Jae-un even felt embarrassed. Ho-bang apologized, saying his body had overwhelmed him. Jae-un was shocked that his opponent was so unskilled and wanted to find support in the director. But he understood it was now his turn. Ho-bang was ready for this. He thought so, but didn't expect to see a fist in front of his face so quickly. And of course, he didn't dodge and got hit. However, nothing happened. Hobang didn't even budge from his spot. Jae-un's surprise was undeniable. Was he really okay? Did he actually get hit? Hobang said that the opponent did hit him, but it all happened so fast that he didn't understand anything. Jae-un was simply in shock. His astonishment hadn't faded all this time. Now he felt a spark of athletic interest awaken. The director recognized that look and shouted for Jae-un to stop. But the athlete was already unstoppable. And Hobang understood that his end was near. Jae-un's strike was very powerful indeed. He landed several blows. Hobang's face was like a punching bag for the athlete. There was no result, so he gathered all his strength, after which he delivered the final blow. The ropes barely held Hobang. The director began yelling at that idiot Jae-un. But then he fell silent, a look of astonishment appearing on his face. For Hobang said he truly hadn't noticed the fists. He didn't even understand when the hit came. Hobang knew that athletes were on a completely different level. Compared to them, he was just a snail. But both Jae-un and the director were left speechless. How was this idiot even standing on his feet? Hobang asked if he should continue. Jae-un was already ready. The battle was getting more and more interesting. Hobang immediately charged and lunged at his opponent. His movements were quite loud compared to the opponent. But Jae-un immediately struck back, thinking that Hobang was very clumsy on top of everything. However, the opponent didn't give up and landed another blow right away. Well, he was trying. And then another one. But Jae-un blocked everything and counterattacked. Hobang didn't give up, and after a few missed strikes, it seemed like he actually managed to land something. And it was something incredible. Jae-un simply couldn't believe that this newbie could be so strong. Although the professional athlete blocked, his arms were burning mercilessly. And they didn't just hurt. Jae-un was trembling all over. Hobang, as always, was worried for his victims. But the opponent remained silent. Suddenly, he felt that before him stood not just a simple newbie, but a strong master to be feared. Hobang asked if they could continue, but the opponent dropped his hands, after which he admitted that he had lost. Shock was clearly written on Hobang's face, so he decided to apologize, feeling he should. Jae-un had never seen anyone apologize for a victory before, but it was even cute. Meanwhile, the training had already ended. It was so strange that it fell to the one who had the advantage and was advancing. Jae-un couldn't believe he was just an ordinary person. This was a monster. After all, Hobang had never even fought. The director said that in that case, he would take care of him, and they, along with Jae-un, would train together. Of course, the athlete didn't like it, but he had no choice.